We talk with two members of that House committee from Southern California, Democrat Adam Schiff of Burbank, as well as Democrat Pete Aguilar of Redlands. So, Congressman Schiff, starting with you, what was served during that public hearing on Thursday?
Well, I think the chairman set out the historic stakes, the fact that in our long history, there's never been a president who sought to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power until now, until Donald Trump. And the vice chair, I think, gave the public both a roadmap to what they'll learn in the coming hearings, but also just a sampling of the overwhelming evidence we've accumulated. Showing testimony of Bill Barr and Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, General Milley and others. And the public is going to be seeing a lot more of that kind of deposition testimony as well as live testimony about all of the different ways in which former President Trump tried to overturn the election, beginning with the big lie and ending with that violent attack on the Capitol. And then finally, Conan, I thought Officer Edwards provided the most powerful rebuttal to the fiction that January 6th was some normal tourist day. I found her testimony just incredibly powerful.
What have you learned over the course of this investigation?
I think that what I learned over time in the investigation is just how multi-layered the effort was to overturn the election. It wasn't just about January 6th. It began with a big lie that began even before the election, with the former president saying that it was going to be plagued by massive fraud, that votes counted after Election Day were somehow suspect, when he knew there would have to be a lot of votes counted after Election Day, given the pandemic and how many people voted by absentee ballot. It continued with bogus litigation, with pressure on state legislators, with the creation of fake certificates of election. It continued with a pressure campaign on the vice president and ultimately led to that violent attack. One thing led to another, which led to another, as part of an organized effort, essentially a plot to overturn the election. And I certainly didn't have a full appreciation of that until we started digging in to everything that led up to January 6th.
Congressman Aguilar, Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, has said the hearing is all about changing the topic. Democrats don't want to talk about high inflation, high crime, problems at the border. This is all politically motivated to try to bolster your chances of maintaining a majority come this fall. Your response?
It's just detached from reality. But, our job, our focus is to tell this story as completely as we possibly can. We're not worried about a political calendar or the next election. Kevin McCarthy does a very good job of only focusing on those pieces. Our job is to do this well and to tell the American public what happened on January 6th, what led up to it, and what were the causes of it, and to make sure that this never happens again.
So, Congressman Schiff, is it your belief that after this is all over, the Department of Justice should file a federal indictment against the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump?
I certainly think that what we've accumulated should result in an investigation of multiple potential federal crimes. And this, of course, is not just my opinion. The federal judge in California, Judge Carter, has said now in more than one opinion that he believes the former president and others likely committed federal crimes, including the crime of conspiracy to interfere with the joint session, fraud against the United States. And so I think he's right. I think that those issues need to be investigated by the Justice Department. Ultimately, it'll be up to the Justice Department whether there's sufficient proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But I am concerned that some of these things do not appear to be under investigation by the Justice Department out of an interest to avoid controversy. And frankly, in these times, you can't do your job and not be controversial. And I think there needs to be one standard for the rule of law applied equally to everyone, and that includes the former president.
What should we expect in the hearings to come? 3 more this next week.
Well, next week, the public will be invited to see hearings 2, 3, and 4. We will talk about the big lie and the fraudulent manner in which the president and those around him continued to perpetuate the big lie, even though they knew that he had lost the election. So we'll talk about that. We will talk about the state pressure campaign, and specifically the Georgia pressure campaign that was undertaken. and we'll hear about the Department of Justice efforts under the former president, where he wanted to install his friends into positions of power that could have affected the outcome here, as well as the pressure campaign on Vice President Mike Pence, which will be next Thursday as well.
The two members from Southern California on the House Select Committee on what happened January 6th, Adam Schiff and Pete Aguilar, thank you very much for taking the time.